Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the Bowermaster and ESM monthly webinar series. This is designed to educate and advise on topics that are affecting our clients. In respect of everyone's time, I want to keep these to 30 minutes or less. So we will get moving here, get through the material, which is very important. Today we'll be handling managing your temporary and seasonal employees for safety and workers' compensation, which I know with some of my clients is a very topical issue right now. We've got some case law in California that is affecting how this is being managed and what we need to be doing to protect ourselves moving forward. So I think we'll have some great information here for you. This just goes along with other resources that we are bringing to our clients to make sure that we are positively affecting your bottom line. And so we'll get started here. One of the things that we have added is if you are on this webinar, and you do have to be on it live in order to get this, but you will be supplied with a certificate of completion that you have received this training. You can keep that for your files to show that you've been trained on this topic. And then what we're doing from an underwriting and marketing standpoint is we are adding these into your submissions at renewal that will go into the carriers to show that you are taking your risk management and loss control seriously, which will in turn help us get additional credits on your insurance renewal. So win-win for everyone. At this point, my name is Chris Trudeau. I'm a senior advisor here at Bowermaster and Associates. I've been with Bowermaster for 13 years. And but I am really no one in compared to who will be handling this webinar. Sharon Poston from ESM will be taking over. She has 35 years of experience in these topics. ESM and Bowermaster have been partnered for almost a decade now and have made some really, really great strides for our clients over those years. And we continue to and look forward to continuing that relationship. So Sharon, go ahead and take it over, pass it on to you, and close it out at the end.
Okay, very good. Thanks, Chris, and hello, and thank everyone for joining us today. As I mentioned, we have a full house, so we think this is a topic of interest to you. Our focus today is on safety and workers' compensation. We know that you have many other issues, including wage and hour regulations, benefits, taxes, and so on. And that would be an entire webinar in and of itself. Today, we'll be talking about managing your temporary agency and your temporary employees, including how to onboard them to your safe work practices. Then we'll slightly refocus and talk about your regular employees who are seasonal or part-time and how that impacts their disability rates and entitlement to temporary disability. And finally, how do you accommodate work restrictions for a seasonal or a part-time employee? For the first half of this presentation, we will talk about temporary employees. And let's start with addressing your contracted temp agency. Who manages this relationship? We have seen the negative results if no one manages the temp agency, especially ensuring that their workers' comp coverage is in place. If the temp agency lets their work comp coverage expire, the special employer or host employer will likely be held responsible to pay those costs. So begin by assigning this administrative responsibility to a specific person, and then track the safety results. If there are too many injuries with the temp staff, find out why. Where do changes need to take place? With the agency or with you? Chris is going to be addressing coverage issues at the end of this presentation. Do you know the temp agency's screening process? Here are a few questions to ask. How do they recruit candidates? What is their application and interviewing process? Do they do a drug screen, background and reference checks? I think these are important aspects for you to know to ensure that they are bringing qualified individuals onto your site. You want to look out for their safety and the safety of your own employees. These temp employees may be your opportunity to try out an individual, so you want to ensure that they go through as rigorous a screening process as you would for your direct hires. Have you provided written job descriptions to the agency that list the physical requirements of the job duties? And have you agreed in writing who's responsible for safety training? Cal-OSHA says both the primary employer and the host employer are equally responsible for safety. Sometimes you have an immediate need to hire individuals for a specific job or project. If you are not using an agency and you are hiring temp employees directly or as independent contractors, beware. This Chris just referenced a recent California Supreme Court case called Dynamex versus Lee, and it defines an ABC test for independent contractors and shifts the burden of proof to the entity who is hiring. This slide is the subject for an entire webinar, but I wanted to alert you to this recent case. And while it's for wage order rules only, I think it may have far-reaching results. If you just Google Dynamex decision, you are going to find all kinds of information out there. It's very pertinent. It just passed in May 24th, a Supreme Court decision. And then it's good for you to confirm with your employment law experts if your hiring practices are violating any laws. You also have Jill Malcolm, the HR manager at Bowermaster, who will be able to answer additional questions if you have on this topic. Prior to bringing on temporary employees, evaluate the length and the scope of the work, and provide this information along with your job descriptions to the temp agency. As I mentioned before, Cal-OSHA says primary and host employers are both responsible for the safety of temporary employees. What does your safety onboarding look like? Who provides it, and what is the safety instruction for onboarding a temp? The administrative onboarding for your regular employees probably includes a new hire safety orientation, review of your IIPP, code of safe practices, how to report an injury. All of those same practices should apply to your temp employees. Then field or department training, including a job safety analysis and worker instructions. And we recommend a mentor or some kind of a monitoring program for temps to ensure that they work safely throughout the season or throughout the project. And then who provides the ongoing safety training? We recommend that all sites include temps in all safety tailgates and trainings, the same as the full-time employees in their department who are attending. OSHA requires you to train and supervise temps as well as regular employees. And then who keeps the OSHA 300 log? Again, we recommend that you write up an incident report for all temp incidents and injuries, and recordable incidents go on your OSHA 300 log. Temporary employees, just as your permanent employees, are a valuable asset to your organization. All the same wage and hour and employment laws apply to them. So set them up for success by ensuring that they are onboarded and managed with your same safety standards. And what do you do if one of your temps is injured? Well, you follow the same protocols for immediate first aid in the event of a traumatic injury. And for lesser injuries, strains, sprains, minor cuts, you will have trained them on their onboarding process and tailgate meetings to report all injuries to their immediate supervisor, who then follows your standard protocols, reporting to whatever your practices are, your safety manager, HR, or your workers' comp coordinator that apply to your organization. The injury is then reported to the temp agency, and you complete the OSHA log if it's a recordable injury. Now, this part is what you could have arranged before the season started or before the project started, is that you should know right away who's the contact person at your temp agency, what's their phone number, email, so that you can contact them immediately if something like this does arise. Then, if your contract includes the option of modified duty, work with the temp employee, the agency, and the doctor to accommodate the temporary restrictions. All right, now we're going to slightly switch our focus and talk about your regular employees who are seasonal or part-time. And we'll talk about some of the claims management specifics that apply to these employees. For a regular seasonal employee who is injured, if work restrictions cannot be accommodated following an injury by the employer, the injured employee is provided with temporary disability benefits, but there are some specific rules that apply. Normally, temporary disability is calculated at 2/3 of the gross weekly wage. But if an employee is paid at a piecemeal or a variable or a seasonal basis, the temporary disability rate is calculated by taking the total prior year's earnings from all employers, maybe they work for someone other than you, dividing by 52 weeks to achieve an average weekly wage. If an employee does not usually work during the off-season, and they are still considered disabled when the season ends, no temporary disability is due. Now, let's say they're still temporarily disabled at the start of the next season, then benefits will be resumed at that point. It's really important to notify your carrier and the specific adjuster when your season ends. Send an email with the end of the season date, and be sure to notify your injured employee too if they're not at work. I recommend do it twice. Send it before the season ends or right as the season is ending, and then follow up after the season end date to confirm that temporary disability has been ended, and confirm that the adjuster has notified the employee and confirmed that there are no off-season earnings. You know, often once the season or project ends, it's easy to lose track of the employee and the claim. And while temporary disability may not be due, medical benefits and medical costs continue. So I recommend that you stay in an ongoing communication with the claims adjuster to ensure appropriate medical treatment and that accurate rates are being paid. So follow up, ask questions, ask for a plan of action and target dates. What is the adjuster doing to ensure that this employee is recovering and released to full duty? Okay, let's take a look at a case study and why this is important to manage the claim. In this study, we have a 28-year-old seasonal tomato processor. He only works the 3-month tomato season each year. You know, tomato season is usually July through October. In this case, the 28-year-old is injured, but he only works, and he doesn't have any off-season earnings. So I'll give 2 examples. In the first example, the employer immediately provides modified duty, and he's able to continue to work until the season ends. Even if the doctor says he continues to be temporarily disabled, no TD is due during the off-season if he doesn't have other earnings during the off-season. In the second example, no modified duty is offered, and temporary disability begins after the 3-day waiting period. Then TD should end when the season ends, unless the employee can provide proof of off-season earnings. I've had so many cases in which the employer forgot to notify the carrier of the end of the season date, and TD, temporary disability, just continued. In this instance, resulting in a $5,000 overpayment of temporary disability. Now, sometimes you can credit that to other benefits, but often judges will not allow you to do that because the judge feels it's the carrier adjuster's responsibility to know when to pay and not pay. The employee doesn't know that he should or should not be receiving temporary disability, and most judges don't want to penalize the employee if it's not something that's their responsibility. Okay, let's look at another case study for a part-time employee. This case involved an employee who only works on the weekend. It was an organization that's kind of like a flea market. You know, they just open Friday, Saturday, Sunday, and so that's all he worked. The employee is injured on Sunday, and he goes to the doctor that day, and he's given work restrictions for the next 10 days. Now, I know it may seem illogical to you. Does anything in workers' comp seem logical? But temporary disability rates are calculated on a 7-day week, no matter how many days the employee actually works. So again, I'll give you a couple examples of what can happen. In the first instance, modified work is offered. The employer immediately offers modified work, in writing within the doctor's restrictions. The work offer goes to the employee and to the claims adjuster. And then Joe returns to work the following weekend in the modified capacity until he returns to the doctor. So again, he's off work during that period of time during the middle, but you've offered modified work, so he's not entitled to temporary disability during that period of time. No TD benefits are due in this case. Then on example 2, the employer does not offer modified duty. So following the 3-day waiting period, temporary disability begins, even though he was not scheduled to work on that day. Because remember, temporary disability is calculated on a 7-day week basis. I know this is a bit confusing, but just remember it's always good to consider providing modified work if you can, and always put that offer in writing. It saves many potential disputes in the future. In summary, temporary employees and seasonal or project-based employees require special consideration. Managing your temporary staffing agency and continuing to manage the claims of any seasonal or part-time employees will produce the most optimal results for your employee and save you money too. I've listed a few websites here. There's so much available to us on the internet now. It's really wonderful. But you can take a look at how do you define temporary employees, how do you define independent contractors, and then key California employment law. I know that's your favorite thing to read, but sometimes it's interesting to read what happens to other employers so that you can avoid those same pitfalls. Okay, this was a short one today, Chris. I'll let you come back on. Are you there?
I am here. Sharon, thanks so much for that information. Short and sweet today, guys, but a lot of great information and things that we need to be cognizant of, and making sure we're handling our temp and seasonal employees to the best of our ability to make sure that we're reducing any pitfalls. Just to touch on a couple of things that Sharon went over. There's a lot of scary stuff that's happening in the California with the temp and independent contractor world. On the staffing side, I would just as a little tidbit, all staffing companies are not equal. There are some bad ones out there, and so I would encourage you, if we understand that it's a necessary evil. Obviously, we'd love to have everybody as a full-time employee and part of the culture of your business, but we understand that things come up. There's fulfillments and some ebbs and flows in the business, and we'll need to bring on some temp staffing every once in a while. I would just encourage that we're vetting these staffing companies, using the most reputable ones. I would try and keep the amount of staffing companies that you're using to a minimum. Only use the few that you know are good out there. And then a couple of things just from a risk transfer standpoint to make sure we're putting in place if we are using a temp staffing agency is, like Sharon mentioned, we want to be getting their workers' compensation certificates semi-annually. A lot of things can happen in the year, and unfortunately, some of those things could be that staffing company losing their insurance. So by checking semi-annually, or even quarterly if you wanted to, it helps make sure that coverage is in place. Going a little further, you would want, and you could talk to your Bowermaster advisor about getting this, but you'd want to get an alternate employer's endorsement from your staffing agency that you're using on their certificate. It's basically like an additional insured for the workers' compensation arena. And then also a waiver of subrogation is, those are best practices and things you want to be requesting from them. So that, I think, does it going forward. I think we have some action items for you, and hopefully you got some knowledge out of this. coming up. Sharon, if you want to go to the next slide. Continuing our webinar series to help you out with what's going on out there. We will have the next one coming up, which will be litigation strategies for best workers' comp claim outcome. A lot of what we do is to reduce the likelihood of having workers' compensation claims, but we all know that they do exist and they do happen, and sometimes they get litigated here in California, unfortunately. So when that does happen, we want to make sure that we are handling them from the beginning and handling them in the best way. So that webinar will go over how to do that and some action items and making sure that you're doing that in the best way with your Bowermaster advisor and with ESM, because they are our workers' comp claims handling partner. So
Chris, I'm going to interrupt you here for a minute. I think this is going to be an interesting topic because there is a lot of talk about cumulative trauma. This, I know, is a sore spot for many, many Southern California employers who have post-termination CT cumulative trauma claims that just seem so unreasonable and so unfair. And it's being talked about at the highest level. So we are encouraged that perhaps there is something on the horizon. Right now it's talk, but this is where it starts. So I do hope you tune in, because I encourage you to stay involved with your political representatives, because that's where the changes get made.
Absolutely, it is a difficult arena, but we are hoping some changes are on the horizon that will make it a little bit more employer friendly. So I think that's it for today. Again, please make sure you reach out to your Bowermaster advisor to go over anything that you've learned or have any additional questions. You will get an email with certificate, and as well as a forum to ask any questions that you might have, and we'll get back to you with those answers. But for now, we'll leave you off to the rest of your day, and thank you very much.